The people that are dying in Massachusetts or having severe morbidity are Black women. Black women. It's nearly doubled in a state that has the infrastructure, has the dollars, has the best education, biotech, entrepreneurship, life sciences. I could go on and on where we're number one, but we're also number one in ensuring that Black women do not survive birth. And that should be the urgent call to action that we should be doing everything we possibly can to get to zero.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Charlotte Golar-Ritchie, and I'm the lead producer for this program this evening, Birthing Justice, Finding a New Way Forward. Our goal tonight is straightforward. It's to raise awareness about the state of maternal health in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and also raise awareness about the related disparities. I want to thank our 14 sponsor organizations, including Boston Children's Hospital and the Wagner Foundation, which provided funding support. And I also want to thank our artist, Tony Pepe, who you may not know, but he's the chair of photography, associate professor at Boston University, and he lent us the photo that's on the flyer that was circulated in order to promote this event. Now, before we meet our outstanding speakers, I want to share a little background about this program. Tonight's convening is taking place as a result of a partnership between Mass Inc. Commonwealth Beacon and the GBH Forum Network. And Mass Inc. has come to this effort through a fellowship program that was recently launched in honor of Greg Torres, who served as Mass Inc.'s president and CEO. He was also the board chair. And sadly, we lost him last year. I'm honored to be serving as a Greg Torres Senior Fellow. Greg's successor is someone I have known for probably close to 30 years. You're going to meet him in a moment. His name is Joe Kreisberg. And he was excited about the idea of partnering with GBH over the next 2 years to produce a series of public convenings. And as I worked on other programs with GBH in the past, including with support of Lee Hill, who I believe has arrived, and his Lee and his wonderful team, I'm happy to be back working with Annie Dreffler, Frederic Rigoleau, and Andrew Van Ness over the next 2 years on our new series. Together, we're going to lift up the voices and the viewpoint where issues of equity are central, with the hope that these discussions will promote deeper thinking on a variety of issues and even bring about some positive change. Tonight, guided by a talented moderator, who you will meet shortly, we're going to hear from an all-star group of panelists, one who is stepping down from the legislature after nearly 30 years, Rep. K-Con, and a 30-plus year legend in the birthing justice movement, Dr. Joanna Rorie. And with that, I want to thank you all, really. Thank you for being here this evening. Thank you. Joe.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's great to be here with you and our friends at GBH and all of you tonight for this important discussion. I just want to say a couple words. What is Commonwealth Beacon? For those who don't know, we are a independent, nonprofit, online civic news platform covering state government, state politics, and civic life here in Massachusetts. We offer a free daily newsletter where you can read our original reporting, thoughtful opinion pieces from civic leaders, and get a curated summary of the news of the day. Our team works really hard. They're led by our editor, Bruce Moll, and we're really proud of the work they do, and I invite everyone to subscribe. You can get information at the table out front. I couldn't be more delighted than to have Charlotte Golar Ritchie as one of our inaugural Greg Torres Senior Fellows. I mean, it's just such a delight. As Charlotte mentioned, we go back a long way, and it's great to be working together again in this way. And I know that Greg would be thrilled at this event and all the great work that Charlotte and our other fellows are going to be doing. We're particularly excited about this discussion because it's such an important topic that doesn't get enough coverage. We've done a couple of articles in Commonwealth Beacon, but more discussion is necessary, and even more importantly, we need action. The disparities that we're going to learn about tonight are unacceptable anywhere, anytime. But in 2024, in a state that prides itself on great health care, they're completely unacceptable. We need to do better, and tonight we're going to learn how to do that. So looking forward to the discussion. And with that, I'll hand it off to my colleague, Lee Hill.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I think you can do a little better than that. Good evening. All right. Welcome to GBH. My name is Lee Hill. I'm the executive editor for GBH News, and so glad to have you here. We're going to start by doing something that is a custom here, is a newer custom here, and that is reading our land acknowledgement. We think it's important. GBH honors the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc peoples, whose ancestral lands provide the foundation for GBH's Massachusetts studios, bureaus, and transmitter. We honor the cultures, contributions, and connections of Native, Indigenous peoples to our work, our local community, our Commonwealth, and our nation. Further, we recognize the importance of moving beyond acknowledgement toward action. Somebody say action. We commit to learning from, including, and elevating Native Indigenous peoples' perspectives, voices, and languages locally and nationally through our public media mission. Okay. You're welcome back to our welcome. I'm so glad to see everyone here tonight. And so proud that once again, the GBH Forum Network, shout out to Annie Schreffler, Frederic, is Frederic here? Hey, Frederic, and Andrew, to our Forum Network video unit devoted to sharing public talks from around Boston, is once more collaborating with Charlotte, who has worked closely with us before, as she mentioned, to produce important conversations around women in politics. I don't know if you've attended any of those conversations, but they're very insightful. Now, as a Torres Senior Fellow, Charlotte has come to GBH once more and will honor the legacy of Massing's former CEO, Greg Torres, by convening people to examine the urgent issues we face in our Commonwealth. And it just also happens to be a mission of GBH News to build community through convening around important news of the moment. It's great that we have this in common. Tonight, we will hear from several talented leaders. We have a few legislators here in the House, Representative Kay Kahn, Senator Liz Miranda, Representative Brandy, Fluker, Oakley. Give it up. Give it up. As well as healthcare experts and advocates for improving maternal health. Each one of them is committed to improving life for people in Massachusetts, especially those expecting safety and equity when giving birth. The topic of maternal health is an important one. Our public affairs show Basic Black has looked at the concerning statistic of Black birthing women experiencing the highest rates of death, and also explored initiatives for expanding doula services and establishing birth centers to decrease infant mortality rates. I know you will hear more about that tonight, and this is a great start to a new collaboration that I am looking forward to. So once again, so glad to have you all here. But before we get started, I need to introduce our illustrious MC, moderator tonight. Saraya Wintersmith is a politics reporter for GBH News, maybe editor one day. As a politics reporter for GBH News. And when she isn't creating an epic podcast, how many of y'all have heard What Is Owed? Yay. The groundbreaking piece of journalism that explores reparations in Boston and around the world. But when she's not doing that, she covers Boston City Hall and Boston politics. Before that, Saraya covered Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan neighborhoods, focusing on how people live and the issues that shape each community. She is a graduate of Howard University in Washington, D.C. That said, welcome again, and Saraya, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Tell them my blood type, Lee. No, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm Saraya Wintersmith. I'm very happy to be guiding the conversation this evening. We have two back-to-back panels with, I think, some of the state's most knowledgeable voices on maternal health. I'm going to start by taking some language from the recent PBS documentary, Birthing Justice, which you can watch on PBS Passport. I think you can still watch it on PBS Passport. The film sheds light specifically on the Black maternal care crisis. And the line says, welcoming a baby into the world should be a joyful and exciting time. But we know for many mothers, particularly Black mothers, who are at higher risk for pregnancy and childbirth complications, childbirth is an event that makes clear some of the various gaps and issues in our healthcare system. Our first panel will give us a bit of historical perspective and shed some light on some of the factors that cause maternal care inequities to exist. Our second panel will discuss potential solutions to the public health challenge of improving maternal health. And so with that, let's meet our first group of panelists who are seated and ready to go. They are Dr. Ndidiamaka Amutah-Onukagha, the Julia A. Okoro Professor of Black Maternal Health at Tufts University School of Medicine. Welcome. State Representative Kay Khan of the 11th Middlesex District, who is retiring. Dr. Joanna Rorie, Clinical Associate Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology at BU School of Medicine, a midwife, and a member of Boston Medical Center's Midwifery Service. And Emily Anesta, co-founder and president of the Bay State Birth Coalition. Welcome. Representative Khan and Dr. Rorie, I want to start with the two of you, and Rep. Khan, as the retiring public servant on the panel, I'll let you start. How did you come to be concerned about the issue of maternal health? And just give us as much context as you think is necessary.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to WGBH and Mass Inc. and Charlotte Gola Ritchie, who, by the way, is a classmate of mine. We came into the legislature together. And so this is very exciting. It's like going full circle. So very nice to be here. So 30 years is a long time, so I have a lot to say probably. And I think I'll take you back. It was thought that I should give some history to how I got started in around the whole issue of maternal health. So I'm a nurse. I came in as a psychiatric nurse clinical specialist. And when I entered the legislature in 1995, I met this another legislator who was from Framingham. Her name was Barbara Gray. And she was really, I think, one of the first people who took note of the needs of women who are coming into the criminal justice system. And so she started a group under the auspices of the legislature to look at these most vulnerable young women, and really was concentrating on the health of the women. And so it was really paying attention to that need. And so I joined her and said, well, I have this mental health background, so maybe I'll join you and we can together see what the needs are. So I went with her out to the Framingham MCI, and she was just one of these people who would walk in and she'd walk up to the women and she'd shake their hands and, ask how they were doing and what their needs were. And so I just really followed her along, and so I became very interested in the whole issue around the women who come into the criminal justice system. And I also had a constituent who was also interested in this area, and she took me off. She was volunteering at Suffolk House of Corrections, and I would go with her sometimes to meet the women who were there. And she wasn't really doing the maternal health piece. She was teaching them about Shakespeare and trying to get them to really understand more about their own lives. And so together, between Barbara Gray and my constituent, I just kind of moved forward with this whole interest in maternal health. And so I worked with Barbara Gray for a while, and then she retired from the legislature, and she handed me, don't worry, I'm not going to hand you a lot of bills, or maybe I will, who knows. But she handed me 12 pieces of legislation and said, okay, it's up to you now. And so, believe it or not, in the 30 years, I'm still working on some of those pieces of legislation. One is, I think, might even be in the Senate budget. We can talk about. And so that's really, I guess, how I got started. And I was one of these sort of bleeding heart people, and I was one of the pieces of the legislation that I was really interested in is that, you know, what I found out is that women who are incarcerated and go through, and many of them are pregnant, and so a couple of things concerned me. One was that when they go off to deliver their babies, and by the way, there are two midwives here in the audience who were actually midwives, they were delivering these babies at Boston Medical Center at that time. And so what I learned was that one is that they are shackled. So you can imagine being in labor and being shackled with your arms behind your back as you are driven to the hospital. So that was a big concern of mine. And that was one of the bills that was handed to me. So I really went down the road on that one. And the other one was that women should be able to keep their babies after they deliver. And that was not the policy here in Massachusetts, but I did hear that it was a policy in New York. So of course I took a group with me out to Bedford Hills, New York to visit that particular prison. And there was the superintendent there had been it was suggested by a nun, a Catholic nun, that this would be something that they should consider. And believe it or not, they set up a whole building for young women. And they had to select the women. It wasn't every woman, but so many of these women were delivering babies, and they would keep the babies with them in the room at the prison. And they had to take care of them 24/7 and learn how to do that. And the only time they got time off was when they went to a class on parenting or on substance use or just whatever their issues were. So I came back to Massachusetts and I thought, oh my, we have to do this. And so I spent a lot of time trying to move that bill forward. It wasn't successful, it's still not successful, but there were some other places that it was happening to some degree, and I think you'll hear a little bit about that. So I was also interested in an organization called Social Justice for Women, and they were actually doing some work around bringing in some of the women from Framingham and letting them have their babies and then keep them for a period of time. They were mostly women that were going to be leaving the system relatively soon, so there was that opportunity. So I just moved ahead and was very interested in the whole issue around maternal health. And I started out in the legislature filing legislation that wasn't given to me, but new pieces of legislation. And one of the big issues was around nurses, sort of a midwifery, overall midwifery look, and that was that there were nurse midwives who wanted to have the ability to practice independently, because they were often the ones delivering the babies at the hospitals, Mass General, Tufts, places. And so but they weren't able to practice independently. They were supervised by the physicians. So the feeling was that didn't need to happen. And so I went down that road with Marian Hart, who happens to be here in the audience. We worked together on moving that bill forward, but we also tried to combine it with this other group of midwives, the certified professional midwives. And a lot of what we're going to be focusing on, I think, during this panel are the certified professional midwives that we really would like to see. They're the group that would really like to see, like to have the ability to be licensed. They're already delivering babies, doing home births, but they would like to be licensed. And so this bill will license them, and I think the purpose of that is really to open it up more, to be able to get insurance so that more women can have their babies at home, if it's choice. It's all about choice, it's all about public safety. because you want to be able to, if you have to transfer a woman to a hospital during the labor, happens sometimes, you want to make sure there's a relationship with the hospital so that they can transfer the baby, transfer the mom, and make sure everything goes well. So
I don't envy you having to be the person that had to come back and tell Massachusetts they were behind New York on policy.
Yes, right, yes. So it still hasn't happened. That they are licensed, but we really want to make sure that they can deliver babies at home. And so that's one of the bills that we're working on, and I really have to thank my two colleagues, Representative Brandy Fluker Oakley and Senator Miranda, who are both championing this, and also mentioned Senator Rausch, who's another sponsor of that bill. So we're working on it. We're hoping, I mean, I've been working at this now for almost 30 years. So we're hoping that we can get it done. And we did have to split the two. The nurse midwives, we were able to pass that. So they became, they have the ability to practice independently. And that happened in 2012, I think, that we were able to get that done. So that's done, and these nurses can practice independently, and we're just waiting to do the CPMs. And I see them both kind of working together, opening up a practice and working together. And we hope we'll have these birth centers that will be also coming on board as well. So we're very excited about that. There's only one in Northampton, but we're really excited that there's one in Boston that I think is potentially about to open.
More about this in the second panel, Representative Khan. I'm going to cut in and let Dr. Rorie answer the same question. I think I read that you began your career in the late 1980s when the state had an infant mortality crisis, and doctors everywhere were also struggling with cultural competency. So clearly you have a passion for advocating for joyful and safe and healthy pregnancies. Where does that come from?
Well, I was getting ready to graduate from Simmons College as a baccalaureate nurse, and I was looking around the city for what I was going to do and where I was going to work. And at that time, most of the hospitals had their own nursing program, and so they hired their graduates from their program. Made sense. And one of the things that I thought I never wanted to do was, as a new graduate and as a new nurse, you have to work nights for many, many, many years before you can move into working day, evening, and you could spend 20 years waiting to get on to the day shift. So I was a little concerned about that. My advisor said to me, look, you did so well. You did so well with maternity nursing. Why don't you think about midwifery? Now, I had heard about midwifery while I was in undergraduate school, but I knew at the time that midwifery was illegal. It hadn't been legalized in Massachusetts yet. It wasn't legalized till 1977. So I said, oh, it's not legal? Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. And so I went off to Yale School of Nursing to get a Master's of Science in Nursing and midwifery. At the time, also in the country, if you wanted to be a midwife in the United States, you had to go through nursing and a nursing graduate program. That's changed. And so from there, that education and looking at, I was looking at outcomes, OBGYN maternal outcomes for Black moms and babies at that time, and knew that there was a huge disparity between Black and white moms, Black and white babies. And so I decided that Roxbury, Dorchester, which are the communities that I grew up in, the women from those communities deserved midwifery care. And so I came back, and I started a midwifery service at Beth Israel, what's now Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and worked with some very, very rigid personalities to try to get midwifery institutionalized at Beth Israel. And for a few years, for 5 years, I stayed for 2, and then went back to the community in Roxbury, went back to Demick Community Health Center, and became the director of OBGYN services, and I stayed there for 23 years, but brought midwifery to Demick. And thanks. And Representative Khan and I were passing each other in the night. Just, she would be at MCI Framingham, and then I ended up going to MCI Framingham and bringing prenatal care to the inmates for about 3 to 4 years. And it was the Social Justice for Women group that I was a part of. And I want to give a shout out to one of my first bosses, which was Judy Nosigian. She hired, or she was working with Social Justice for Women, and she signed my paychecks. Went out there, started midwifery at the prison, and worked around that legislation that Representative Khan talked about, which was getting rid of shackles during labor and delivery. And it is true that women were shackled to the bed. The guards had to be present and in the room while she was delivering. Babies were whisked away. Sometimes they got to see their babies after delivery, and sometimes they didn't. Mm. So I stayed at Demick, and then the nurse midwifery education program came along at Boston University in the School of Public Health, because the School of Nursing had closed by then. And 13 years of teaching and graduating some 82 nurse midwives who are all over the world doing midwifery and incorporating the midwifery model into the lexicon. And then I just decided, okay, since nothing really is happening, we've decreased the disparity between black and white women, okay? But it's still twice, right? Mm-hmm. Am I right on that?
Yes, it is.
Okay, okay. It's
Yes, ma'am.
still twice the rate, okay, of women of color dying during birth, and poor outcomes for fetus, babies of color. So I pretty much have been involved with the whole movement that started back in 1991 when St. Margaret's Hospital, some of you, know that story. St. Margaret's Hospital, which was in Dorchester, closed its doors. And it closed its doors during a time when the maternal and fetal mortality and morbidity rate was very, very high. And so we have been looking at this disparity and looking at the utilization. What does the midwifery model bring to this? And that's for the next panel. But
Excellent. Emily, I want to turn to you and quickly reference a 2023 data brief from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. It looked at deliveries in the state between 2011 and 2020, and it found that our severe maternal mortality, that is the complications of labor and delivery that result in consequences to the birthing person's health, the severe maternal mortality rate.
Morbidity.
Morbidity, I'm
Yes.
sorry, almost doubled within those years. What does that mean for people who want to have children in this state, and why is this an issue that should matter to everyone, in your view, if we're all acting as ambassadors for this issue?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. It's great to be here. So, for a while now, we've been talking about we've been talking about maternal mortality. That's been thankfully getting a light shone on it for a few years now, where, I think the public's become more aware that we have a maternal health crisis in the United States. Despite our wealth, despite having the most expensive, sophisticated healthcare in the world. But it's long been said that maternal mortality is the tip of the iceberg. So the absolute numbers are still small. I mean, every loss is important and monumental. And fortunately, while those numbers are way too high and we know that they're preventable, the absolute numbers are still small. But it's the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more people experiencing this severe maternal morbidity. And so how is it that in the last 10 years, that even here in Massachusetts, where we have, most people have health insurance in Massachusetts, we've had that longer than the rest of the country. We have first-class hospitals. How could we have severe maternal morbidity doubling? And also the racial inequities where, the brunt of that is being borne by people of color, but the rates are too high for everyone across the board. Not everyone is going to become pregnant or give birth, but every one of us was born. Every one of us was born to someone. Someone birthed you. So what was that experience like? Were they respected? Were they heard? Did they have their needs met? Were they supported? Were they safe? Did they feel safe? And that's important because these severe maternal morbidities are important. Nobody should be severely injured and having health complications from their pregnancy and birth, but also the experience of care is important too, and nobody should be mistreated. Everyone needs to be heard and feel safe, and that's going to look different for different people. Were people surrounded by love? Did they emerge from their birth experiences feeling powerful and confident? And I'm happy to say that I was able to do that, but a lot of people aren't. We all know also someone who's going to give birth, someone in our lives, a family member, a sister, a friend, a partner, and they deserve to survive, they deserve to be healthy, they deserve to thrive. The impact of the birthing experience, the pregnancy and the postpartum is so important to the individual, to the family, and to the whole community. And if we're not protecting people and supporting people during this one of the most important, momentous moments of our lives, the thing that our species is using to continue, what are we doing? It has to matter to all of us.
Yes, give it up for that. Dr. Amutah-Onukagha, this is a hard question because I'm absolutely certain you could give a TED Talk and talk about all the factors.
I did that already.
You did that. She's actually done it a couple of times.
It's on YouTube, guys.
But you've done so much work, so much research, so much advocacy. You've got the Center for Black Maternal Health. You've got the Reproductive Justice, the Black
Lab.
Maternal Health Week conference that you just did the 7th edition of this year, the Mother Lab. If anybody knows, where are we failing? What's contributing to the U.S., by most measures, a developed nation, having that rate that's 32.9 deaths per 100,000 births? And then why is it worse when we look at Black women?
Yeah, thank you for the question and thank you for the opportunity. We're feeling in a couple different ways. One, the lack of diversity in our workforce is abysmal. So I'm a faculty member in the School of Medicine at Tufts University where I started my center. And when I was recruited there in 2017, there were maybe like 3 black faculty. I am a Ph.D., I'm not a clinician, but that number has not changed on either side, MD or Ph.D. And then when we go to the training of our clinicians, so residency programs are also super competitive and really difficult for residents and physicians of color to get matched into. And then we recruit them to a place like Boston, at least Massachusetts, and the cost of living is astronomical, and we're not able to retain this really highly trained workforce. My sister's an OB resident right now, and I'm like, can you just please stay here when you graduate in a couple years? And I'm like, how do we retain this amazing workforce, right? So that's one thing that we're failing on is the diversification, lack of diversity in our workforce. Another thing we're failing on, it takes so long to get data. And I know, for large scale data to be really clean, I'm an epidemiologist, so I love data, but the reality of it is that we are about 2 or 3 years behind in the release of timely data. So what does that mean? That means we're trying to catch up, right? Like we're missing opportunities. I am the principal investigator of an NIH study, National Institute of Health funded R01 grant. And in our study, we're looking at high-risk utilizers. So Massachusetts is actually a national leader in this area. We have the Pell database. Anybody heard of Pell? Which is an amazing database that DPH maintains on pregnancy and early life outcomes. And we're looking at Pell data to look at where are the high-risk utilizers, where can we interrupt these periods of severe maternal morbidity in the pregnancy period. So someone presents with SMM, among these 21 indicators, preeclampsia, hemorrhage, et cetera. How do we change that for the subsequent pregnancy? So that's one thing we're lacking on is diversity in the workforce and data. And when we talk about black birthing people, I think the biggest thing that I would just say is that the way racism shows up so pervasively in our healthcare system is really just killing anything that we're doing in the United States. We are failing so miserably on the healthcare and racism front. So it's so hard to even get into medical school to get matched to these programs. Then you get trained and you go into these obstetric units, these labor delivery spaces, and the racism is just embedded into the training, into the medical education, into the policies. And this is how structural racism shows up. It's not one bad actor or one bad nurse, it's the pervasiveness in the system. And that goes from the history of obstetrics and gynecology. J. Merriam Sims, anybody heard of him? Right? He perfected his techniques on the bodies of black enslaved women. This is the historical context that we're sitting in today. This is how the field of obstetrics and gynecology came to be. So he did all these procedures on enslaved women without anesthesia, without consent, over and over and over, trying to perfect how do we repair a fistula? How do we use a speculum? And then once he got his techniques right, he took his newfound talents to Europe, where white women were able to benefit from these new reproductive advancements. So this is the history of obstetrics and gynecology in this country. And that racism still shows up in the training of clinicians today. So that's why when we see maternal morbidity and maternal mortality for black and brown birthing people, the rates are higher. Not only are clinicians coming in with implicit bias, not making eye contact, not sitting down and developing relationships. This is not for every clinician, but I'm saying the field, the discipline is so deeply racist and problematic. And so that's why we're seeing these outcomes. You have the historical context and you have the current medical training, you have a lack of diversity. Dr. Rorie talked about midwifery was criminalized, but we all know that black women are the backbone of the midwifery care model in this country. So how do we criminalize this, right? So when we moved away from the community-based midwifery model to the criminalization, we lost a cadre of highly trained midwives who are incredible, amazing, life-saving clinicians. So we have a long way to go. Massachusetts is not immune by any stretch. We actually are doing really poorly in our severe maternal morbidity rates. But that's the historical context I'm trying to walk you through, which is why we see the outcomes we see today.
You see why she gives TED Talks.
Can I just wondered if I could add something to that.
Very quickly, our time is winding down.
Yes.
So I just want to mention that I think all of this thinking has been there, but it was really in 2019 when Representative Miranda and I filed legislation to really form a commission to actually look at why this is happening. And so that bill did pass in early 2021. And so I think as a result of that, there was a commission that came about. And so it's really given more of a presence to do a lot more investigating in terms of why this is happening and to get the numbers, to get the data. And there is a report that's come out, but I think there's a lot more work that still needs to be done.
Yes. Dr. Rorie, I think they'll need your cultural competency back again, it sounds like. Emily, I'm going to let you have the last word here because we're winding down, but I think it's a good place to leave off for our next panel. As quickly as you can, when we think about policy, it's kind of up in the air and nebulous, but how does that impact somebody's experience with pregnancy and childbirth?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to boil that down really quickly. So, pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum, that feels really like a very personal decision. What do I want my family to look like? When am I going to have kids? How many kids am I going to have? How's that all going to be? Fortunately, in Massachusetts, many of our reproductive freedoms are protected, so we can make those really personal decisions. Yes.
Clap it up for that.
However, when it comes to once we are pregnant and we start thinking about, what kind of care do we want? How far away is the nearest birthing hospital? Is there a birth center in my community? Can I access a home birth? That's where the policies come in. So the fact that midwifery was illegal impacted what was available then. When I was pregnant with my first in 2008, Rep. Khan hadn't yet gotten her law passed for autonomy for nurse midwives. And so, that impacted what was available to me then. Nurse midwives were barred from attending home births. So if you wanted a home birth, you have to pay entirely out of pocket, and the only providers available were unlicensed. And that it also impacts birth centers. The fact that law, again, for autonomy for nurse midwives is passed, paved the way for Seven Sisters to open as an independent birth center, and in the future for Neighborhood Birth Center to open as an independent birth center. And the laws that we're talking about that are pending, regulations on, what is required to open a birth center, how can clinicians practice, who is licensed and allowed to practice, deeply impacts our choices. And so when we feel that our only choice is to give birth in a hospital, the hospital maybe is far away, the hospital perhaps, has a VBAC ban in place. And so, someone might not be able to access a vaginal birth after having a prior cesarean birth. And these are all the policies that actually impact this very personal experience. You talked about the Birthing Justice film, and then that film talked about joy. I mean, we deserve to have safety, choice, and also joy in these experiences.
Excellent. You guys already gave him an applause. Applause again. I wish that we had more time, but we got to switch to our second panel so we can talk about some solutions. Ladies, thank you so much. So our second panel is focused on potential solutions and some of the really important work that's being done at the State House and in our own communities to address maternal health inequities. State Senator Liz Miranda of Massachusetts 2nd Suffolk District, aka the blackest.
Center of Black Life.
We've got State Representative Brandy Fluker Oakley of the 12th Suffolk District.
Blackest.
Also the blackest. Dr. Lucy Lomas, Executive Director of the New England Medical Association. And Nashira Baril, founder of Neighborhood Birth Center. Welcome. So I'll just say here at the outset some of what we were discussing in the last panel with respect to figures and history of maternal health disparities. It's so prevalent that it's gotten to the point where I see a lot of women on social media saying that they associate childbearing with risk, and it's not one that they want to endure without support. So if the girls on social media are talking about it, then we know it's a real problem. Dr. Lomas, as a Black woman OB-GYN and a mother, how has your personal journey influenced your approach to patient care and advocacy for improved maternal health outcomes, particularly for Black women?
Thank you for asking that question, and thank you so much for having me here speak on this panel. I would say that my own experience with pregnancy and childbirth absolutely transformed my ability to talk and connect meaningfully with my patients. You just gain this real world experience from being pregnant. I learned what that round ligament pain actually feels like. And when I was 20 weeks pregnant and working in the office, seeing patients in and out, I was like, I cannot walk. Fortunately, it was brief, but I was just able to really connect with what they were experiencing. And then during the postpartum period, when I was trying to breastfeed the babies and pump milk while I am at work and overnight on call, and I'm sure my husband would also share stories about our freezer being full of breast milk. That was just something that added to my understanding and just being able to really support the patients and give them real world solutions. Let them know, what did I experience and how did I overcome some of those challenges. And then similarly, like the advocacy, I really appreciate having NEMA, New England Medical Association. So that is our community of Black physicians. And our goal is to increase the diversity of the physician workforce. We love Massachusetts, we love this state, and we want to see more Black doctors, more Black and brown people, because what we know is when our healthcare is more concordant, it does improve clinical outcomes. So having the opportunity to be able to work with Senator Liz Miranda and Rep. Brandy Fluker Oakley, as well as Senator Decker, right? Like, we are so appreciative of being able to share our stories as physicians and clinicians, but also as community members. I live in Roxbury, and I'm so excited and looking forward to the Neighborhood Birth Center. And thank you. And I'm excited to support the effort and also hopefully help educate not just patients and community members, but also physicians and clinicians. And we just need to take on the collaborative approach and work with the midwives and work with our lawmakers and legislators and work with the people that are deeply knowledgeable of data and research, and work with those people so that we can actually make actions that are meaningful and have real impact.
Somebody say action.
Action.
Nashira, you've been pushing and casting vision for Boston's first birth center, and that's despite the fact that we've seen birthing centers closing in recent years. What can you tell us about where the Neighborhood Birthing Center is in process? And then how do you imagine that facility impacting the disparities in Massachusetts that we're thinking about trying to solve for?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We are getting ready to submit our plans to the zoning board for the city of Boston in the next few weeks. I got a chance to be on a Zoom call with our architects today and see what I would call our near final plans, and you all.
It's looking good.
Like, our objective is tears. Like, just really to bring everyone, to drop into an emotional state and be like, this is what healthcare can and should look and feel like. This is what's possible. So our hopes are to go through zoning, get zoning relief, and to break ground by the end of this year, so 2024. And in terms of the second question, I think what's possible, our commitment is to, as best we can in one space, meet the need that we just heard in the last panel and get really clear about, right? So patient-provider concordance, right? We want to make sure that we can hire and retain midwives of color to work in Roxbury, in the heart of Boston, in the heart of Black Boston. Our financial models include us having at least 50% of our patient population on Mass Health. So maybe not surprisingly, but that's not the highest paying insurance company in the state. And so we have to plan accordingly, right? If that's who we want to serve, then we're figuring out how to make that work, and also turning to Mass Health and other payers to cover the costs of midwifery care, right? And to cover the costs of midwifery care outside of the hospital in the same way that they do cover inside the big hospitals. So what we've come to understand is that birth centers get reimbursed, near a third or a quarter of what, for example, Mass General Brigham would get for the same vaginal delivery. And so our commitment is to pay the midwives well, to make sure the midwives have paid time off. Most birth centers, unfortunately, are relying on the goodwill and the unpaid labor of midwives. And I think in a state like Boston and in a city like, state of Massachusetts, city of Boston, the buck stops here. We're not turning to midwives to keep the birth center operational. And then I think, in addition to, we've been talking a lot about birth, but Neighborhood Birth Center will provide full spectrum midwifery care, right? So that's family planning and medical abortion and menopausal care. I'm thinking a lot about estrogen these days, right? So we need somewhere to go for trusted reproductive health care. And in addition to that, the birth center is nestled in a community commons. And so we have nonprofit organizations and other social justice movement groups there. Somebody said back to me the other day, we had a house party fundraiser, which is, by the way, thank you to you all. This is how we're opening a birth center in Massachusetts, which is beautiful and also terribly frustrating that even this past Saturday, I was still passing the hat in a rainy backyard to open the Boston's first birth center.
Community, Nashira, that's community.
I'm so grateful. There are probably donors in this room. I'm so grateful.
Let's make it happen.
And come on, insurance companies, right? Right. That's speaking of like inequity, who should be paying for this? But the thing I wanted to just say is that we are nestling the birth center with other organizations. So it's like, what happens, after you give birth, right? That there are organizations there that are thinking about economic democracy and how we, have a more sustainable and just future, and how we organize around housing and the carceral system and abolition. And so it's just like really beautiful to feel like the birth center is a part of a larger ecosystem, really practicing in that location the world that we want to see into the future, where those babies are going to grow up.
I want to stay with this concept because I heard both of you mention the word concordant. I'm not familiar. Is that getting to the idea of building trust and cultural competency, like with our providers?
Yes, absolutely. So what we know is that when we have culturally concordant care, so basically if you have a Black physician and a Black patient, then yes, there is more likely to build trust. And that is definitely something that we all want, right? If we have a more diverse physician workforce, a more diverse group of clinicians and nurses and healthcare workers, then we can also take care of a diverse community that is our city and state.
Excellent. Somebody say concordant.
Concordant.
There we go. For our electeds on the panel, State Senator Liz Miranda, I'll go to you first. What are some of the legislative solutions we're pushing for to get the state to address what we're discussing?
Thank you. Happy to be here. And I want the record to show there's 2 women from Mattapan, 2 women from Roxbury on the panel, right? In many rooms, I wouldn't have to say that, but I just wanted to say that the brilliance to solve our hardest problems are not at that building at 24 Beacon Street all the time. The solutions are in community, and we're just lucky, and we work really hard to get into these seats, but we take our cues also from community and lived experience. So there's a bunch of solutions, and I just want to take folks back a little bit. So I am not a mom yet. When I walked into the State House in January of 2019, many people have heard my story that I heard from March of Dimes that first week. They did a presentation. Me and Rep. Nika Elugardo were the only 2 Black women. At the time, there were only 3 Black women. Now there's 4. Me and Representative Brandy Fluker Oakley make 50% of the Black women in the state legislature in 2024. And basically, I was told that I was going to die giving birth. I mean, that's literally what the data said. They had the 10 worst zip codes. And I remember crying in the elevator going down because I'd come to the State House to work on gun violence. My brother had just been murdered a year and a half before that. And I was in the elevator just thinking about all the times that birth trauma had been shared with me or I had experienced by watching my younger sister give birth to a baby that didn't survive, or hearing about my friend telling the doctor that she was in pain and she almost died because she had sepsis because she had a cut in her large intestine that basically polluted her insides. And then my friend who had to pay almost $15,000 for a doula in the last month because she was going through birth alone, and story after story. And I knew then that I had to do something. I didn't know what to do, but thankfully Representative Kay Khan and Senator Becker Rausch had this bill on the commission that Representative Decker co-chaired. And through that process, I learned a great deal. And so I want to just say that we have to do everything. It's sad that when we have to choose, yes, we passed postpartum coverage past 60 days, which was a solution in that commission. Thank you for that, to their year. We know that doulas should be covered by Mass Health, and we're happy that now it's included in the Mass Health waiver. But we both, Representative Decker and myself, have omnibus bill that includes multiple interventions because this public health crisis will not go away. It will not go away if we do one thing at a time. Now I go places and everyone's talking about Black maternal health, but I don't know about y'all, but I can kind of think that you guys would agree that I'm tired of hearing about my own death. I'm tired of hearing about Black people's death, Black women's death. And so although our communities are the most impacted, it is also the place where progress is being made. It is also the place where there's hope. And hoping that that we pass the legislation that is the omnibus legislation that has multiple key pieces of legislation at the same time, because we know we cannot just pass one bill at a time. The second thing is putting our money where our mouth is. You know, AG, I want to thank AG Andrea Campbell. She came out with a maternal health fund. And I went to the Senate and I said, hey, we need one too. You know, and it's at $1 million in FY24 and FY25. But we probably need $10 million, you know? And the governor, after she was elected, came out with the $10 million DPH pot to also help improve infrastructure. So the solutions are many, and you can read all about them, but the most important thing is that that we center the people that are most impacted in creating the solutions, because this is really, like Dr. Ndidi said, it is about anti-Black racism. We have to call it what it is, and we have to talk about that the people that are dying in Massachusetts or having severe morbidity are Black women. Black women. It's nearly doubled in a state that has the infrastructure, has the dollars, has the best education, biotech, entrepreneurship, life sciences. I could go on and on where we're number one, but we're also number one in ensuring that Black women do not survive birth. And that should be the urgent call to action, that we should be doing everything we possibly can to get to zero. We are not at zero, we are not exceptional, and we need to really address the fact that although we've been the best for a long time, the undercurrent is that we are not the best in maternal care here in the Commonwealth.
Can I say, please, 1 second, just to add to that list of stats? Massachusetts ranks 32nd in the country when it comes to the integration of midwives into our healthcare system, right? And so often I get did that change? 30?
No, I said 32nd.
Did it change, Emily? It's probably worse, yeah. So I often get the question like, really? Massachusetts only has one birth center? And the answer is like, yes, absolutely, because we're dominated by a medical model. And there's an incredible power in the medical model, in the infrastructure here, and the answers have been in midwifery. But this is a state that, you know, has a lot of resource and access, and not doing so hot when it comes to the integration of midwifery, which is a proven solution to the maternal crisis.
I'm gonna come back to you, Rep. Fluker Oakley. Let's stay there, because this is one of the questions that I have. Why do we only have one?
Are you coming to me? Yes. For that reason, I mean, you know, birth centers are vulnerable. Birth centers across the country I should say economically, financially vulnerable, because they rely on, again, the self-sacrifice of midwives. Midwives self-finance birth centers, remortgaging your house or coming out of your own savings, 401k to open a birth center, if you have it. You have to also have access to midwifery education and in some places licensure, and that's been racially redlined. And then midwives are working at birth centers 90 hours a week and often going without a salary. And so, that I would argue is not working well for anyone.
Sustainable.
Not sustainable. And then you add the complexities of state regulations here in Massachusetts that make it almost insurmountable to open a birth center in this state, back to the needing to have obstetrical oversight, not being able to hire certified professional midwives who could arguably be the most familiar with out-of-hospital birth. And so there's a bunch of things stacked against us, and all of them have, policy or economic solutions that are right here, right? The solutions are right here in front of us, and we're working really hard to address them so that this birth center is sustainable and so that others can open. We believe there needs to be a birth center in every community, and so we're not working just to make sure that neighborhood birth center is sustainable, but that Lynn and Worcester and Brockton and every other community can have a birth center that is thriving and not turning to midwives to go unpaid and catch babies.
Rep. Fluker, Oakley, I'm going to give you this, because we lost our mic stand last panel. But I want you to revisit where we are in process with, and if there's anything that you want to add to Senator Miranda's round of legislation that she was talking about. What are some of our solutions?
Yeah, I'm happy to add to it, and just thank you for hosting this evening. I'm pausing because I just don't know where to start.
It's vast.
This is vast. This is deep. This room is palpable, with joy, with pain, with sorrow, with hope. So I'm feeling it. If I'm being completely transparent and trying to figure out where to go. With that being said, I'll just briefly share how I got into this movement. I was just a regular person like y'all, not an elected official, forced to have Twitter because of my job at the time. I wasn't happy about that. Followed then Rep. Miranda. And I have a friend at my job at the time whose sister's an OBGYN in Minnesota, who had been leading the charge in terms of research and what was happening with Black women in the birthing process. So I'm getting data points over like lunch breaks from her about what's happening with Black women. She was pregnant with her second child at the time. Then I'm on Twitter and I see that Rep. Miranda at the time made a post, and I literally commented, "Oh my gosh, somebody's finally talking about this," because that's how I felt as a Black woman from Mattapan who hopes to give
connected
birth
on social media. The girls
someday.
Connected on social media.
And so when I got into the legislature, just grateful that she and Rep. Khan and others allowed me to be like the kid sister, if you will, in this movement. And so 2 pieces of legislation that I'm presently working on with Rep. K. Khan and also Senator Becca Rausch related to CPMs, which we've heard so much about today. It did get out of Public Health Committee, and it's now in Healthcare Finance, which is huge. It hasn't made it this far, so we are very excited about that momentum that we have. And I believe it's included in Rep. Decker's omnibus bill that hopefully will be coming before us soon too. So there's good momentum and energy around it, and I think it's due to all of the folks in this room. Your voices do matter, even though sometimes some elected officials might try to say go away or buzz off. At the end of the day, we are accountable to you. And so I'm just grateful for all the decades of advocacy that have allowed us to see this bill move forward and be as far along as it is in the process. And for those of us in this room, we know that giving birth is not just the end of what happens. There's also the postpartum period and support there. And sadly, here in Massachusetts, there is not equitable access to postpartum resources, and there needs to be. So this is the other bill that I filed with Senator Liz Miranda around the Moms Matter Act, which really makes sure that not only do we have access to resources in community for those dealing with perinatal mood and associative disorders, but also that we have a diverse workforce. I'm a still concordant workforce in terms of providing those services. I have a constituent who lives on the Mattapan High Park line and got through her birthing process with very little to no complications, but did experience some postpartum PMADs and needed the support. The closest circle that was available to her, and that's the resource that we know generally works in community, was all the way in Walpole. And it was in the middle of the day. Now, thankfully, she had think about how privileged you have to be, right? To be able to commute from Mattapan Hyde Park to Walpole. The MBTA will not get you there in any godly sane amount of time. To be able to have the flexibility in your schedule to take the time off from work or not be working to make that commute back and forth in the middle of the day. And then when she got there, I like to say she was the only chocolate drop in the group, right? So then she's going through probably the biggest mental health episode of her lifetime after this very beautiful yet taxing on the body process of giving birth. And then she's the only brown person in the entire group after commuting an hour back and forth in order to get there. That should not be anyone's story. And that's what the Moms Matter Act does, is it provides resources to community organizations so we can have more of these in community and also diversify the workforce so that way folks can have folks who look like them, a little more cultural competency to help support them through this process. And that bill did progress out of the Mental Health Committee, and I believe it's in Ways and Means now. So that's where we are with that bill.
Dr. Lomas, what about postpartum care? We haven't talked about too much of that, but I feel like the next thing that I see the most of on social media is the fact that people are waking up to the reality that you go through a whole bunch of emotional, physiological, if there's nobody to help you through that.
No, absolutely. There are a lot of changes that happen and a lot that we really don't understand. I remember when I was postpartum, I was literally looking for, okay, well, what is the science behind what is happening with my body? And how can I better understand that so that I can bring it to my patients? And there was just a lack of information and resources. And then also in the postpartum period, I will always screen women for postpartum depression and our mental health disorders. And there is just not enough of these postpartum support programs, whether that is an outpatient support group, whether it is just breastfeeding support, mom groups. And when women have a more severe or intense postpartum depression episode, I did a lot of my work in Brockton, and we would refer women to Rhode Island when they actually needed more hands-on postpartum depression care and support. So, and also another observation that I had was a lot of our breastfeeding and postpartum pregnancy support services have decreased and diminished drastically since the pandemic. So there are people that do have access and do have resources, and there's just not enough opportunities. There are not enough places for people to go. So when we talk about diversifying the healthcare workforce, and I did just want to add a little bit about the work that NEMA, the New England Medical Association, is doing in partnership with Senator Liz Miranda and Representative China Tyler. We are working on getting hospital demographics to release information about what is the demographic makeup of our physician and healthcare workforce. But it sounds like we also need that information expanded, not just for physicians, but nurses and healthcare workers and perhaps everyone in the hospital and the healthcare system at large, so that we can really help support the people that are in most need.
I saw you pick up your microphone.
If I may add. Okay, we're back. If I may add, Saraya, just a couple of things when we're talking about postpartum. Research shows that Black women are most likely to experience postpartum and least likely to get the help that they need. So that's another reason why this is extremely urgent. And there are some bills that we have at the legislature. I want to lift up Rep. Carol Fiola actually has a bill recognizing that after someone gives birth, they're more likely to go to their pediatric appointment for their child than they are to go to their own personal appointment. And so how can we actually encourage the pediatrics to do the screening there, recognizing that they might really be the first touch point given the demands of life and everything that's happening for the person who just gave birth as well. And also that screening too needs some TLC as well for all my practitioners out there. However we can make that happen. Just want to put that out there.
I agree.
Senator Miranda, I'm coming to you because you mentioned doulas being included in the Mass Health waiver. I think that there's a doula midwife thing going on in the medical community now.
Finally, I mean, I wanted to say a couple of things. One of the things that I want to uplift that we don't have enough time to talk about is really that all of our policies should be centered in health equity and justice. Because long before people start their birth journeys, that's where the challenge is. Where you get to live, where you get to get an education or not, what food do you eat, whether you live in an EJ community like me in Roxbury, where we have 5 times the asthma rate and we're dying 23 years ahead of folks who live in the Back Bay. So health inequities have really been rooted, and we can't talk about the birth justice movement or reproductive justice without acknowledging that. You know, one of my first other events that I went to is there's a statewide doula coalition, and this was another, you know, my friend had given birth and she had hired a doula. She had a good job and she was like, you know, I'm scared, I'm doing this alone. And I read somewhere, Miss Magazine, somewhere, that I needed a doula. But for her to find someone who was of color, who was located in Dorchester, near the Bowdoin Street corridor where she lived, was almost impossible, and it was very cost prohibitive. But she had no other choice, so she's like, I'm gonna do this and spend the thousands of dollars because her insurance didn't cover this. The Doula Coalition has been doing great work across the Commonwealth to really center doula care as having someone to help you get your voice. It's not to speak for you, but to help guide you through the birthing process. When my sister was pregnant and telling her doctor that she was in pain, and they told her, take some Tylenol, take a nap, you're just anxious, this is your first birth, a doula could have been able to say, no, you are feeling pain and your doctor should be listening to you and centering your voice. And so we've come a long way in doula care. I think midwives, you know, everything has shown us that both of them involved in the birthing journey leads to better outcomes. And Massachusetts just needs the political will to get these two things done, to make sure that not only is Mass Health covering doula care, but private insurance as well, and making sure that we can license midwives so that birth centers can not only happen in neighborhood birth center in Roxbury, so I can give birth there, but that we can replace Cambridge, we can replace Peabody, we can finally give the South Shore the maternal health care it deserves, because that is a maternity care desert if I haven't ever seen one in my life.
Nashira or Dr. Lomas, I'm going to ask you one more thing before I open up to the audience with questions. Is there anything that suggests that if we make space for doulas in healthcare providing, that will also help to foster trust among women of color, Black women who have that skepticism about the medical system?
I definitely think so. I was living in Los Angeles for over 15 years, and that was where I did my undergraduate, medical school, and even residency training. And that was just a normal part of my medical education, where we spent many months just working with midwives. So when we discuss working with midwives here within the healthcare system, that just sounds so normal to me, because that was definitely a part of my regular medical healthcare practice. And I also think that doulas and midwives definitely help people find their voice. And we also have to acknowledge that our healthcare system and a lot of the traditional physicians just really need to listen to Black women. And we have to change the culture so that we can just really help people feel like they are well taken care of and supported.
Thank you. I would think I would just add, I see some beautiful doulas in the room tonight. Doulas, raise your hands.
Hey.
Look at how many doulas are here. Thank you all for your work. I think I just want to say that, there's doulas in my life. There's this young doula that, would come to me just to process after she had supported a birth. And her focus, of course, was on the person in labor and on the infant and making sure that family was taken care of. And after she got out, she was like dysregulated, right? Because now you've got 2 Black women standing in the face of obstetrical violence and obstetrical racism. And if we don't really think about how we shift power, then what we're doing is actually just dysregulating a whole nother tier of Black women themselves who couldn't become pregnant. And, so I like to say, I love doulas, and we can't just add doulas and stir. I think that there has been, because it's not, I don't think it's working well for doulas either. And I think when we're doing that for the last many years in the Commonwealth, there's been a real focus on adding doulas and not wanting to actually talk about power imbalance, right? And structural issues. So yes, do I want everyone to have access to a doula? Absolutely. And we need to make structural changes so that doulas and the pregnant parent and the midwives are all sharing power in a different way in the medical model, in the healthcare system. So I just, I think a lot about how we increase access to doulas in a way that is healthy and sustainable for them as dear parts of our community. And we're not just throwing them in as, I think, a solution that many say, oh, there's a crisis of maternal health, let's just throw a doula in the room. And now you have 2 Black women in the room.
And just really quickly, I'm going to have to agree. We cannot just say, oh, doulas are going to fix this problem, right? It is far more complex than that. And Nashira brought up so poignantly how this is about hierarchy and power. And when we empower people and empower communities and help people learn, how do we really make healthcare decisions together and collaboratively, so that it's not all falling on one person? That's very heavy. I don't want to carry that, but I'm absolutely willing and wanting to work in collaboration with others and taking care of more people.
And I would just, if I could add one quick thing.
You may.
Last stat that's going to come out of my mouth tonight. Stat. Is just that the majority of folks who give birth in this country, who give birth in hospitals, 99% of people give birth in the hospital, are considered low risk and could do so safely outside of a hospital in the care of midwives, in a community, supported by doulas. And so I think I just want to say that for the room, that what we're talking about, the solutions that we're talking about, increasing access to midwifery, increasing access to birth centers, doing so in an equitable and sustainable way, is absolutely, proven to be life-saving to address the inequity and can be done for the majority of the population. So it really is about power and economics, and we have to be willing to face that if we want to tackle this crisis.
I'm turning to you all in the audience now. I think we have time for a couple of questions. We've got this panel. They're captive. They can't get away. Is there something that you would like to ask them?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Edinker-Kuba. I'm the Executive Director of Children's Health Watch, one of the co-sponsors here tonight. We're a research and policy center based at Boston Medical Center, focused on young kids and their families. So very related issues, and love all that you've been saying. But I'm really struck by how much, to your point about needing all of the solutions and omnibus legislation and all that, how much incremental work we're having to do at the state level. And I'm wondering about what's the federal atmosphere, and how much is what needs to change at federal level, how much is state, and how different it is state to state. And to your point about Los Angeles as well, right? In California, context and all that. So just thinking about what needs to be pushed at the federal level and how much we're having to do piece by piece here, and whether you could comment on that.
Ladies, how about that? Any insight about things that need to change at the federal level to make more space?
I'll just mention 2 things. Part of my inspiration to even think about doing an omnibus bill post doing the Maternal Inequities Commission was that there was the Black Maternal Health Caucus created at the federal level. when we vote for Democratic women and women of color and folks in the LGBTQIA space, we get better outcomes because we represent more people. And so that caucus created the Momnibus bill, and that was the inspiration for me, at least, to think about multiple pieces of legislation that I had not been thinking about. So my wheelbarrow mostly included doulas, midwives, thinking about standardizing fetal infant mortality reviews across the Commonwealth and postpartum coverage. But after that work was done, I was inspired to look at the environmental factors, look at incarcerated birthing people, look at veterans, look at folks that were faced with other substance use disorders and how that was impacting birth. So there's a lot of work there done that was sort of leading the way. And I just want to shout out Black Mamas Matter, the national think tank, because them and Mamas Con Poder led the wave for Elephant Circle in Colorado to organize. There was some work in New Jersey. The second thing I want to share was that I do believe that we're on our way. You know, we have a vice president who is a woman and a woman of color who has been crisscrossing this nation to share that what the Biden-Harris administration wants to do. I think, just to be honest, we're just at a critical time in the national political landscape where you can't get much done or passed because they're talking about eyelashes. If anyone caught that joke, but you know, I think the federal, you know, the Biden-Harris administration wants to do more, but when you have the Senate and the House at a standstill, policy is not trickling down nationally. But that doesn't mean we have to stop. So goes Massachusetts, most of the country goes. And so we have the opportunity to not only begin the work to become leaders, but to sustain our leadership in the field, regardless of what the other states do. So I think that that's where I'm deriving my new energy, is like, we can do something here and we must do it now.
I'm a D. Ratner. I'm a family doctor here in Boston and medical director of maternal child health programs in the Boston Public Health Commission. Thank you. I'm here in part representing Mayor Wu and Dr. Bisolo Jukutu, the commissioner, both of whom closing the racial equity gaps in this area of maternal child health have been big priorities. In part, a lot of the types of programs and initiatives that both panels have talked about, starting femurs locally, as well as increasing our perinatal home visiting nurses and community health workers in the city of Boston, as well as starting a doula program, which hopefully would include, we're just at the beginning of this, but including training for doulas in the city of Boston that is informed by the needs of our community specifically. But I do have a question as well. Because I also work as a family physician, I'm spanning kind of the world of the medical industrial complex as well as community health and public health. How do we begin to kind of deconstruct the history of obstetric racism and get the community on board when it comes to both providers in the medical community as well as, you know, the payers, the health insurance, all of that? I know you guys are working on a lot of legislation, but it's such a deep and big thing to kind of start to work on, to work towards having a birth center in every neighborhood.
We lifted that up a little bit in the first panel.
Yeah, I have just two thoughts that came up as you were sharing. One is we need to be having a conversation about midwifery. You know, when I talk about the birth center, what comes back to me is like, oh, I don't know if I would do that, or, you know, that sounds unsafe, or, and then the more we talk about it, the more folks will say, oh yeah, my mom was born at home, right? Or like, I know somebody who, you know, or my grandmother was a midwife. And so I think it's just, it's a narrative and culture shift to have that remembering that it was not too long ago that midwives caught all the babies in this country. The other thing, I think, there is a consequence to the way that we talk about the crisis of maternal health and the ways that it bears down inequitably in the Black community. When the headlines say Black women are more likely to die, and they don't offer a structural analysis of what's broken in the healthcare system, we can then internalize that to believe that there's something inherently unhealthy about being Black and pregnant. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And so the other piece that comes back to me is like, you know, oh, I heard you're opening a birth center. Like, I don't know, because aren't we more likely to die, right? And so then we have to do all of this like kind of conversation and education about actually where all of the demonstrated safety and better outcomes and better experiences are that are in the hands of midwives in community settings. And so I just think about both a reclamation of the history of midwifery and just like normalizing that. Like, who are the midwives in your lives? Ask the elders in your life, like, who were the midwives that caught the babies, right? We're not talking like 500 years ago. They're still here in our midst, right? So I just think that conversation, and then the other, when folks are pregnant and they're saying, you know, I'm pregnant, do you have a good OB? And I'm often kind of like, have you thought about talking to a midwife? Is there a particular reason that you need an OB? Maybe. Thank goodness we have amazing OBs in our midst. And also, could you be well served by a midwife? And so I think there is a cultural narrative conversation that needs to happen that moves birth from being scary and deadly to reclaiming what's possible and joy and power, and how transformational it can be when midwives are there to hold up the mirror and show you your own power.
You look like you wanted to add a thought before we go.
Yeah, just briefly, I just want to echo what Nashira shared, and it reminded me of when we hosted the legislative briefing at the State House last year, and I was headed out my little office suite, and the administrative staffer was there, who's an older woman, born the same year as my mom, 1952, but up here in Boston, and my mom down in rural Alabama, segregated South, and she says, Rep, they're having this briefing on midwives. I don't know about that. I said, well, actually, my mother was delivered by a midwife and all of her siblings because we weren't allowed to go to the hospital in her small rural town in Alabama. And so there was a Black midwife who delivered, or to your point, caught all the babies, throughout the town. And so I do think sharing that story and kind of making it clear that some people had the privilege of being born in hospitals, and I put privilege in quotes if it worked for them, but others culturally, that's not what they experienced, and that is okay too. It also reminds me when you talk about the headline that we're more likely to die in childbirth, and to your point, yes, we can also internalize that, but I think that also takes the responsibility off people who are not Black women to think, oh, there's nothing I can do about that.
That's right.
Because the truth of the matter is, it's not because we're Black that we're dying, it's because of the environmental racism that we experience day in and day out. It's because of the fact that people want our Black girl magic, but they don't want to lift up the mantle to carry the weight of the world that we hold. It's because of the fact that when I walk into a room, you'll greet every single white man and white woman in the room and walk right past me. It's because of the fact when I'm at work and I need feedback on my project, you don't feel comfortable delivering it to me because I might ask some poignant questions back to you, but you'll deliver it to everybody else who doesn't look like me. Ooh. There are actions that we as humans individually do. They call them microaggressions, but y'all, they have macro effect, particularly in our birthing process. And so I just want to make sure folks know it's not about when you use words like industrial complex, that glosses right over folks' head. They're like, that's too big, I can't touch that. But you do control your day-to-day interactions with every single melanated person you come into contact with. And it definitely starts there.
Worth the interjection. I see another hand.
I have a question for our legislators. I am a practice outpatient gynecology. I've worked in 7 of Boston's community health centers. For those of us who are in the communities doing the work, I know my colleagues, we get very weary, especially looking and feeling powerless, looking at the Supreme Court's reversal of policies, honoring affirmative action, and looking at the trajectory of African Americans in this country, and looking at Black physicians that are more likely to serve communities of color and those of us in need. So we talk about concordant care, but the reality is that Black physicians make up 5% of the workforce and Black women 2.5%. We often work in more underserved communities. There's less opportunities for promotion, academic promotion. Pay is not equal, support is not equal. So if you do not have nursing staff to answer phones and this sort of thing, this creates a disparity that trickles down to the patient. So I'm curious for our legislators, is there any discussion looking at that in the state of Massachusetts, as we have community health centers started here, and we also have amazing hospitals, but many patients and patients of color want to be served in their communities, of looking at the structural racism that exists right here at home in the healthcare model. So I'm curious, what can happen from a legislative point of view to actually deal with the system that exists in Massachusetts that is so clear to me as I work in the system?
Thank you so much, Dr. Liza. Just want to point out Best of Boston for 4 or 5 years in a row. Proud to call you my soror.
Thank you, Senator.
There's a couple things. So right now, the Health Equity Compact and NEMA and organizations like both of those, the compact has 85 leaders of color who work across the healthcare system, many from community health centers, trying to drive home this agenda that we have to put health equity first. NEMA has been working a lot on thinking about how do we diversify the workforce. So those two organizations have been lobbying a lot in the last couple of years. But when I first got to the State House, I was meeting with ACOG, I was meeting with MMA, and most of the time they were mostly a white male audience speakers coming to talk to me, and I just didn't have a connection, and they've diversified in the last 4 to 6 years. But those two organizations I take a lot of my cues from. I just want to mention something. So when I also first came to the State House, the community health centers, I knew most of the community health centers in my district, right? So now I'm a senator, so I've quadrupled the number of community health centers. I now have Mattapan Community Health Center. But when I first started, I had Bowdoin Street Health Center and Upham's Corner Health Center, Dimmock. And one of the things that I learned is most people that were pregnant, particularly the Cape Verdean women, my parents are both Cape Verdean, were basically seeing their doctors only when they were giving birth, right? So a majority of their care, not just their sort of prenatal or pregnancy care, was happening on Bowdoin Street and going to the community health center in their neighborhood. So oftentimes they didn't even know who their doctors were at the big hospital. And so we have to do a lot to fully fund community health centers and ensure that they have the resources that they need, because if a birthing person is living in a community where they can walk to a highly rated community health center where they can get all their needs met, when they get to the hospital to deliver, or the birth center to deliver their baby, they actually have more of a connection and more successful outcomes. Right now, community health centers get pennies on the dollar from these bigger institutions while they're delivering most of the care to communities of color.
Hello, my name is Evan. I'm Lucy's husband. Today is Malcolm X Day, and I think if he were here, he would ask us, why can't we expect more? So here in our midst in Massachusetts, there is a movement going on where if you take care of a patient at home, they get paid the same dollars as they do in the hospital. Boston Medical Center is doing it, Mass General Brigham is doing it, South Shore Hospital is doing it, UMass Memorial is doing it. Why can't we expect more for women's health here? This is happening at the federal level and the state level right now. This movement should anchor on the hospital at home movement that is happening today. Why not expect more?
Get your mans, girl.
I love that.
Was that a question?
Look at me. We heard we heard a sermon from the sister. Right? Get your man.
Thank you, Evan, for bringing that up. No, I think that Evan brings up a very, very good, important point. So Evan is working in the hospital at home space, and his argument is, why can't we also do our maternity, our pregnancy care, our postpartum care that maternity care, that reproductive health care, should also occur at home. So I think that does sound like an opportunity for us to make sure that the lobbying and the legislation change also can include women's health and pregnancy care.
No,
Thank you, Evan. Yeah. The only thing I would add is parity, right? That right now in Massachusetts, nurse midwives are reimbursed, something like 85% to the physician's dollar, right? And so when we move it outside of the hospital, we need to make sure that we have parity and that midwives are paid on par for the same service, right? If they're doing I don't think you would do an IUD at home, but if you would do, any,
could.
well, maybe, but for whatever the services that the physician is doing, that nurse midwives who are, qualified to do that same service need to be reimbursed at the same rate. Otherwise, we're going to bring the inequity that we see in payment and reimbursement that's in the hospital and between birth centers and hospitals. We're just going to bring that to home, and then we're going to be looking again to midwives to go broke to provide care at home. So.
And that also reminds me of one additional thing, right? Like as as the hospital at home movement is occurring, and as we continue to build technology that gives people access to clinical care, everything at home, we also have to be mindful of what inequities are we building into the systems now? What inequities are we creating now? And I just have to make sure that people are mindful of that. There are many people that do not have access to the technology that we're building, to the hospital at home for, an assortment of reasons, language being just to name one. So we are also building inequities now, even as we try to be mindful and build a healthcare system that works better for more people.
Excellent. All right, we're ready to wind it down.
Yeah.
Give these ladies a round of applause.
I am moved by and inspired by this wonderful program this evening. I am moved and inspired, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. And I think we could put our hands together once more for this terrific panel. Senator Liz Miranda, Nashira Baril, Dr. Lucy Lomas, and Representative Brandy Fluker Oakley. And then in the front row here, Dr. Ndidiamaka Amutah-Onukagha. Dr. Joanna Rorie. Representative Kay Khan and Emily Anesta. 8 amazing leaders in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we got to hear your stories and your perspectives, and you got to give us some significant guidance about where we need to go next. But all of this was helped by the consummate guidance of an amazing moderator, Saraya Wintersmith. So I am reluctantly bringing this program to a close, and I want to say on behalf of MassInc Commonwealth Beacon, on behalf of the GBH Forum Network, we thank you, the audience, for your presence here tonight.